I first started going to the symphony when it became, you might say, actually a local symphony, and didn't have very much prestige yet or help or support. And as I recall, the first time I ever went, it was at the University of Utah. It seemed like it started at Kingsbury Hall. And gradually it grew, and finally we got a permanent conductor, and it moved to the Temple Square, where it was at the Tabernacle for years.
Along came the fledgling Utah Symphony. You know, it started before 1940. There was a UPA orchestra and a community orchestra, but I think they officially say that it started in 1940. In 1942 was during the war. Of course, the war started in 1941. So the symphony needed players, and somehow I managed to meet the manager that was hiring players, and auditioned and went into the Utah Symphony because they needed women. They had no men around at that point.
Right after World War II, our band instructor in the Idaho Falls High School announced one day that he was bringing us all to Salt Lake City to hear the acclaimed British conductor Sir Thomas Beecham conduct the Utah Symphony. The pièce de résistance for the concert was the Romeo and Juliet Overture of Tchaikovsky. And both times that the fight theme occurs, when the bass drum and the cymbals are supposed to crash as if swords were clashing, nobody was together. And the whole thing fell apart. They didn't stop because the timpani player kept playing. But he was the only one who could keep the beat. And that was my introduction to what was then a community orchestra.
My earliest recollection about the Utah Symphony was connected with the name Shepherd. There were several Shepherd brothers, one of whom was a great pianist. His name was Charles Shepherd. My mother studied with Charles Shepherd, and he had an orchestra in Los Angeles for a while. Mother said, you know, what do you think we need to do to get us a symphony orchestra started in Salt Lake City? He said, oh God, these were his exact words, oh God, there is the single bassoon player in the state of Utah. How are we going to start an orchestra without a bassoon? That was my first introduction to the difficulties that were confronted, they confronted in trying to start an orchestra. The Salt Lake Philharmonic was in existence in the neighborhood of 1900. It was closely associated with the old Salt Lake Theater. It was conducted by Reginald Beals, who came over as a convert from Great Britain, but he was a fine violinist. He really was tenacious in carrying on good music in the Salt Lake area.
When we first started out, we were 18 weeks. They brought in a gentleman for Werner Jansen. He came for a year, and then Abravanel followed Jansen. So when Jansen came, he took us up to 20 weeks of service. And then when Abravanel came back, there wasn't enough money to go to 20 weeks, so he took us back to 18. But Abravanel kept pushing and pushing and pushing. He got to know the community. Every year he tried to increase the load for the musicians to become a full-time job. And then he had this wonderful idea that we should record. And you know, it was just terrible to record because the union prices were more than we could afford.
As many of you know, or possibly don't know, Maurice received the Gustav Mahler Award. When I say Maurice and the Utah Symphony. But Maurice was the first conductor with the same orchestra in the same location to conduct and record the complete Mahler cycle. This was before Bernstein, before anyone. And these records, these recordings are valid and today as they were then. Conductors come here, they study his scores, they listen to his recordings, and that is, it's beyond my comprehension that this orchestra could do this at that time, and they played above themselves. The recordings are fabulous.
That this orchestra would have made over 100 LP recordings is just unbelievable, given what else was going on in the world of classical music and orchestras. Orchestras have always fought within an inch of going down for their lives, even the biggest of them. And what most people do not know is that we did all of the Brahms, all of the Sibelius after that. And started on a cycle of French pieces. There's no telling where it would have ended had Abravanel not had his heart attack.
We had many, many overseas trips. Started out in Greece. That was my very, very favorite concert of all time. That came about because of Gina Balkauer. You know, she was our soloist, and she and Abravanel were such great friends, and she managed to arrange some kind of an invitation for the Greek Athens Festival. And how they put that together, I'm not familiar with all the money, but they managed to do it. We played in Carnegie Hall and went over to Greece and then played in Germany. And then since then, they took us on many other trips. We one of my other favorites was going to South America. That was a 5-week trip, going all over South America. It was just unreal. We played in of course, Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro, and then we played in smaller places. And I just can't rave enough about all the wonderful concerts.
When Balkauer appeared with the orchestra here and was just dumbfounded at what she heard and experienced here as a soloist. And she was an international level soloist. She said, "You've got to come to the Athens Festival." He said, "When do we leave?" There was no question. And that's taking on the big boys. And on that tour, we played in the Musikverein in Vienna. We played in Paris, we played in London, we played in Berlin, and many other places.
Well, big name artists that Abravanel had play with the orchestra include people like early on, like Joseph Hoffman, Joseph Szigeti, Heifetz, Rubinstein, Horowitz, all the big names. They came and played, and of course, in those days, they really drew the audience, and I think more so than they do now.
Attack with the university where Abravanel said, "Well, you've got a wonderful stadium up there, football stadium. We could seat 5,000 people in that. And there is nothing more beautiful in the world than the view from the north, looking toward the south along the Wasatch Mountains about 8 o'clock at night in the summertime when it's balmy weather." And the next year, they began the format which prevailed for many years. That was a musical, which would play for 4 or 5 nights, and that would support a grand opera that would play for 3 nights. And that went on for over 20 years, until the stage literally fell apart.
We did the ballet a lot for years and years. We played the ballet, and then again, my understanding was that the ballet finally just found that the best audiences were on Friday and Saturday. So they wanted 2 weekends of the orchestra. And the orchestra said, we love you, but we don't want to give you 2 weekends, we can only give you 1. So that was when the symphony and the ballet parted. And then now the ballet has their own orchestra, which is wonderful. Ardeen Watts did some operas up at the university that we played for. And then Glade Peterson came to town and did some operas. But we've always played for them.
And I think for many of us on the opera board, the ultimate vote that we took to go into the merger had mostly to do with what would be best for the community. There had been a lot of talk over the years of how can this community, as small as it is, support the number of great arts organizations that exist here, and is there a better model? Is there a better way to focus community support on the arts? So the idea of mergers or various other associations that would reduce costs possibly had been discussed over the years. A number of good things, really good things came out of the merger. I think, first of all, the creation of the Deer Valley Music Festival as a different way for both the opera and the symphony to work through the summer and to attract a wider audience and focus their efforts was one of the great ideas that came out of the merger. I don't think you can underestimate the impact of that on the resulting organization. It has become one of our 3 really core activities, a very big part of our mission. It widened our audience, it widened our donor base, and it allowed us to do things that we really didn't have the resources to do throughout the year otherwise. So it was a great success.